At 2:14 local time on April 16, 2026, a night shift operator at the Tuapse oil refinery, Rosneft's crown jewel on the Black Sea, 12 million tons of crude per year, the only major refinery on Russia's entire Black Sea coast, is staring at a monitoring screen showing flow rates through the ELOU-AVT-12 primary processing unit. When the first explosion turns his window into confetti, he doesn't hear it. That's not how explosions at this distance work. He sees the flash first, a white strobe that turns the tank farm outside into a photograph, and then the pressure wave hits the control building like a truck rear-ending a parked car. His coffee mug shatters against the floor. Every alarm in the facility triggers simultaneously, and through the now empty window frame, he can see something that will burn for the next 2 weeks. A column of fire climbing from the tank farm into the night sky, fed by thousands of cubic meters of diesel, naphtha, and vacuum gas oil, stored in vertical steel tanks the size of apartment buildings. Ukrainian drones have just arrived at Tuapse. They will not be leaving anytime soon. But before we get into the operational catastrophe that turned a Russian port city into an environmental disaster visible from space, let's talk about why this refinery matters more than almost any other target Ukraine has hit since the start of the full-scale invasion. The Tuapse refinery sits on Russia's Black Sea coast, roughly 80 kilometers northwest of Sochi. Yes, that's Sochi, the one with the Olympic venues and the beach resorts, and the tourists who are about to discover what black rain means. The refinery processes 12 million metric tons of crude oil annually, about 240,000 barrels per day, turning it into Euro 5 diesel, fuel oil, aviation-grade TS1 jet fuel, naphtha, and vacuum gas oil. Its associated marine terminal handles export shipments that feed directly into Russia's war economy. The diesel that powers T-90M tank battalions on the Zaporizhia front. The jet fuel that keeps Ka-52 Alligator attack helicopters in the air. The heavy marine fuel that extends the range of Caliber cruise missiles launched from Black Sea Fleet frigates. Practically every drop of crude oil or refined product that Russia exports through its Black Sea ports passes through this facility. Its total storage capacity exceeds 1.5 million cubic meters. The tank farm includes dozens of vertical steel tanks, ranging from 5,000 to 50,000 cubic meters each. Its refining depth, the percentage of crude that gets turned into usable product rather than waste, runs at about 98%, which is extraordinarily high. Rosneft spent years and billions of rubles modernizing this facility, adding hydrocracking units that meet European emission standards. The irony of building a European-grade refinery to fuel an army that's fighting to keep Europe at bay is apparently lost on the management. And it's only about 500 kilometers from Ukrainian-controlled territory near Zaporizhia, which, in the era of long-range, one-way attack drones, is well within reach. Ukraine has hit Tuapse at least 9 times since 2022. The refinery had to cease operations entirely after a January 2024 strike. A March 2025 attack set a 1,000 square meter fire. And on the night of November 2nd, 2025, another strike hit the oil infrastructure hard enough to cause an earlier oil spill. Each time, Russia patched the damage, restarted the units, and convinced itself the defenses were strong enough. They were not. At approximately 1:45 on April 16th, Ukrainian long-range drones on 196 pusher configuration platforms, the workhorse of Kyiv's deep strike campaign, begin their final approach to the Krasnodar coast. They've been flying for hours, launched from dispersed sites in central Ukraine, navigating autonomously through preloaded terrain maps, skimming river valleys and forested corridors to stay below the detection floor of Russia's main surveillance radars. As they reach the Black Sea coastline, they drop to 30 to 50 meters above the water, surfing between the waves below the radar horizon of the 91N6E Big Bird search radar that forms the eyes of Russia's S-400 network. At this altitude, the curvature of the Earth does the work that stealth coatings and electronic countermeasures can't. The drones are simply below the line of sight. For the Big Bird operators watching their screens hundreds of kilometers to the south, the sea surface is empty. A Krasuka-4 electronic warfare system in the area is broadcasting GPS jamming across L1 and L2 frequencies, flooding the satellite navigation bands with noise. Against a standard commercial drone, this would be a death sentence. The platform would lose its position fix and spiral into the sea. But these aren't standard platforms. Within 200 milliseconds of detecting corrupted satellite signals, the flight computers reject the GPS data and transition to inertial navigation. Ring laser gyroscopes and accelerometers, measuring every change in velocity and direction, using the same physics that Newton codified 3 centuries ago, maintain course with precision measured in meters. You can jam radio waves. You cannot jam the laws of motion. The Krasuka-4 operators have no way of knowing that their multi-million-dollar system just accomplished exactly nothing. At 2:07, the first drones cross the coastline. They're now over land, climbing slightly to clear terrain features, and the clock is ticking. The moment they gain altitude, they become visible to short-range air defense, Pantsir S-1 batteries, Tor M1 systems, the low-tier point defense network that Russia has layered around its critical infrastructure. The Pantsir battery closest to the refinery detects the incoming signatures and begins engaging. 57 E-6 missiles launch into the night sky at 1,300 meters per second. The operators are good. Their system is designed for exactly this scenario: low altitude, small cross-section targets at close range. They shoot down 2 drones. The missiles connect, the targets disintegrate, and for about 45 seconds, the battery crew believes they've handled the threat. Then 3 more signatures appear on their screens from a different vector, west-southwest, coming off the sea at a slightly different angle. Then 4 more from the north. The strike package isn't a single wave. It's a timed convergence, with drones arriving from multiple directions at staggered intervals, designed to overwhelm the engagement cycle of point defense systems that need time to reload, reacquire, and re-engage. The Pantsir can track multiple targets, but it can only shoot at 1 or 2 at a time. And there are more drones than there are reload cycles. At 2:12, the first drone penetrates the perimeter defense and strikes the ELOU-AVT-12, the primary crude oil processing unit, the single most important piece of equipment in the entire refinery. Without it, raw crude goes in and nothing comes out. The explosion is not dramatic in the Hollywood sense. No mushroom cloud, no shockwave flattening buildings. The warhead, probably 30 to 50 kilograms of high explosive, detonates against the unit's infrastructure, rupturing pipes, severing connections, and starting fires in equipment designed to operate at hundreds of degrees Celsius. When you introduce an uncontrolled explosive detonation into a system that's already handling superheated petroleum under pressure, the result is a cascading failure that feeds itself. 2 minutes later, the second and third drones hit the tank farm. The vertical steel tanks, some of them holding 50,000 cubic meters of refined product, don't need much encouragement to burn. A shape-charged warhead punches through 15 millimeters of steel, and the petroleum inside does the rest. The first tank goes up in a fireball that lights the pre-dawn sky for dozens of kilometers. The heat from the burning tank begins radiating outward, raising the temperature of adjacent storage vessels that are themselves full of volatile product. Thermal radiation at this intensity doesn't ask for permission. It conducts through steel walls and heats the contents inside neighboring tanks toward their flashpoints. By 2:20, 3 tanks are burning. The refinery's fire suppression systems, foam generators, water curtains, cooling sprays designed to prevent exactly this kind of cascading ignition, are overwhelmed. The fire teams that scramble to respond are fighting a blaze that's already beyond their capacity. Within the hour, the fire has spread to additional tanks, and the column of black smoke rising from the facility is thick enough to be tracked by satellite. The fire at the Tuapse refinery burns for 42 hours before it's brought under control. Not extinguished, controlled. There's a difference, and the 160-plus firefighters working the site understand it intimately. You don't extinguish a petroleum storage fire of this magnitude. You contain it, cool the adjacent structures to prevent further spread, and wait for the fuel to burn itself out. The ELOU-AVT-12 unit is wrecked. The refinery halts production entirely. The marine terminal, the port infrastructure that loads tankers for export, sustains enough damage to make shipments impossible. Russia's only major Black Sea refinery goes dark. On Telegram, the governor of Krasnodar Krai calls it an industrial incident. Drone debris, he says, no serious damage. Residents of Tuapse, who can see the fire from their apartment windows and smell the burning petroleum through closed doors, have a different assessment. But for 4 days, the official position holds. The fire was contained. The situation was manageable. And then, just as the last flames were being beaten down, just as firefighting crews were beginning to pack their equipment, April 20th, 4 days later, the drones come back. At approximately 2 o'clock on April 20th, a second wave of Ukrainian strike drones approaches Tuapse along the same low-altitude sea-skimming corridor. The Russian air defense network, already on heightened alert after the April 16th attack, detects incoming targets. The Ministry of Defense will later claim 112 drones were intercepted overnight across multiple regions. The number may even be accurate, but the measure of defensive success isn't how many you shoot down, it's how many get through. And enough get through. The strike package targets the tank farm, not the processing unit this time, but the storage infrastructure itself. The approach from the sea at low altitude gives the Pantsir batteries minimal reaction time. By the time the track-in radar acquires a target skimming the wave tops at 200 kilometers per hour, the engagement window is measured in seconds. The drones that survive the outer defense layer fan out across the facility. The explosions began at 2:14, then 2:15, then 2:16. Each detonation is a storage tank, 5,000 cubic meters, 10,000 cubic meters, 20,000 cubic meters, vaporizing its contents in a fireball that feeds the next tank in the cascade. The fires that were extinguished 4 days ago reignite. New fires start in sections of the tank farm that survived the first attack untouched. By dawn, 24 storage tanks have been destroyed. 4 more are damaged. The refinery's tank farm, 1.5 million cubic meters of total capacity, is burning across a front that stretches the entire length of the facility. 1 person is killed in the second strike. A gas pipeline is ruptured. A church and 2 schools sustain damage from drone debris. The mayor of Tuapse, Sergei Boyko, confirms that strikes hit several locations across the port's export terminal. The fires burn continuously from this point forward. They do not stop. Now the environmental catastrophe begins in earnest. Burning petroleum doesn't just produce heat and light. It produces sulfuric compounds, nitric compounds, benzene, toluene, xylene, and particulate soot that rises into the atmosphere, mixes with moisture, and falls back to Earth as contaminated precipitation. On April 21st, residents of Tuapse report a phenomenon they've never seen before: black rain. Oily droplets falling from the sky, leaving dark streaks on windows, coating cars in sticky residue, pooling in gutters as iridescent puddles that smell like a gas station on fire. The official air quality monitors register benzene and xylene levels at twice the safe limit. Authorities advise residents to stay indoors and keep windows closed. Advice that rings hollow when the air inside smells like the refinery that's burning a kilometer away. Oil from ruptured tanks and damaged port infrastructure begins flowing into the Black Sea. Within days, the slick stretches 77 kilometers along the coastline. Environmental monitors report dead dolphins washing ashore near Sochi, dead fish, dead waterfowl covered in fuel oil, photographed by volunteers and posted on Telegram channels that the Kremlin can't scrub fast enough. Environmentalist Yevgeny Vitishko, a member of the advisory council under the Krasnodar governor, calls it the largest environmental catastrophe in the region in recent years. Worse, he says, than the fuel oil spill near Anapa in December 2024, when 2 tankers sank in the Kerch Strait. Local authorities don't acknowledge the environmental impact until April 23rd, a full week after the first strike. Schools are closed, a state of emergency is declared. Firefighting crews now number in the hundreds. The smoke plume from Tuapse drifts south across the Black Sea, visible on Vantor satellite imagery as a thick black smear stretching over open water. It reaches Sochi, it reaches Anapa. Residents across southern Krasnodar Krai report soot on their balconies, a chemical taste in the air, and a dawning realization that the war they've been told is happening somewhere else is now falling from their sky. And then, because the Ukrainians understand that the only thing more devastating than destroying a refinery is destroying it again while it's still burning, the third wave arrives. April 28th, 12 days after the first strike, 8 days after the second. The fires from April 20th have not been fully extinguished. 4 days of firefighting had just barely gotten the blaze under control when, in the pre-dawn hours, drone signatures appear once more on tracking screens across the Krasnodar coast. The drones approach from the sea at low altitude. Residents of Tuapse hear multiple explosions. The strike targets the tank farm near the ELOU-AVT-12 unit, the same primary processing infrastructure that was hit on April 16th. The fire that had almost been contained reignites with fresh fuel. More than 120 emergency workers and 39 pieces of firefighting equipment deployed to the facility. The head of the Tuapse district orders residents living near the refinery to evacuate to a school. Russia's defense ministry claims 186 Ukrainian drones intercepted overnight. Flight restrictions are imposed at airports in Krasnodar, Gelendzhik, and Sochi. The refinery, one of Russia's top 10, processing 240,000 barrels per day, remains offline with no clear timeline for resuming operations. 24 storage tanks destroyed, an oil slick stretching 77 kilometers, black rain falling on a resort coast, dead marine life washing onto beaches, benzene in the air. And in Moscow, Vladimir Putin's first public comment on the disaster comes only after the third strike, calling it evidence of attacks on civilian infrastructure that could cause environmental consequences. Could, as if the dolphins hadn't already washed up. On Russian state television, the propagandist Solovyev, the man who spent 4 years telling his audience that Ukraine is losing and Russia's military is invincible, erupts during a live broadcast. "There's a war going on," he screams at a beauty influencer he's interviewing. "They just hit Tuapse, and not a little. We are being hit everywhere." On the opposition channel, a retired Russian army officer goes further. "Have you seen what is going on in Tuapse?" he says. "It is the utter humiliation of all Russian armed forces." On Telegram, the residents of Tuapse are saying what the Kremlin won't. In the My Tuapse group, one user writes, "Still, they call it explosions and debris. Why do they even write it like this? People can see everything." The economics tell a story that no amount of propaganda can rewrite. The Tuapse refinery's daily throughput, 240,000 barrels, represents roughly $70 to $80 million in daily export revenue at current prices. Every day the refinery sits offline is a day that revenue disappears from Russia's war budget. The tanker traffic that normally loads at Tuapse's marine terminal has been diverted to Novorossiysk, overloading a port that was already running near capacity. The supply chain for diesel, jet fuel, and marine fuel to Russian forces on the southern front is disrupted at the source. The Ka-52 helicopters that need TS-1 aviation fuel, the tank battalions that need diesel, the Black Sea Fleet frigates that need heavy fuel oil, all of them are drawing from a supply pipeline that just had its heart ripped out 3 times in 12 days. And half of the gas stations on the Crimean Peninsula had already stopped selling gasoline before the first Tuapse strike even happened. 3 strikes, 12 days, 28 storage tanks destroyed or damaged, 42-hour fires, black rain, a 77-kilometer oil slick, dead dolphins on the beaches of Sochi, benzene levels double the safe limit, the entire refinery offline, the marine terminal inoperable. Russian propagandists screaming on live television that air defense can't stop the attacks. A retired officer saying on camera that the armed forces have been humiliated, residents evacuated, schools closed. And somewhere in central Ukraine, drone operators are reviewing satellite imagery of the damage, updating their targeting packages, and preparing the next wave. Because the fire at Tuapse has barely gone out, and Ukraine has made it abundantly clear that they intend to light it again. The refinery that processes 12 million tons of crude per year is dark. The marine terminal that feeds Russia's Black Sea export economy is silent. And the column of black smoke that's been rising over Tuapse for 2 weeks straight, visible from space, visible from Sochi, visible from the resort beaches where Russian tourists used to lie in the sun without thinking about the war, isn't done yet. Bye for now.